This is the Ag Queen Podcast. This podcast explores the agriculture industry with the movers and shakers of those shaping it. Here's your host, Lori Boyer.
This week's episode of the Ag Queen Podcast is brought to you by DPH Biologicals. To unharness your soil's fertility to maximize yield, be sure to visit dphbio.com. Today, my featured guest is Brian Keel. He is the Executive Director of the Agriculture Trade Education Council. We'll learn more about this organization in just a moment, but Brian, let's get started. Tell us a little bit more about you and your background.
Sure. Well, thanks for having me on today, Lori. It's a great pleasure. So my day job, I serve as Director of Government and Public Affairs for a national agriculture accounting and business advisory firm called Keiko ISM. It's kcoe.com. You can find the website. And Keiko ISM works all across the U.S. with producers, farmers, ranchers, up through ag manufacturing, food processing. And we help people with everything from, again, their tax and audit needs to sustainability planning, succession planning, commodity hedging, sort of everything that farmers, ranchers, and food companies need to run their business. So in that role as Director of Government and Public Affairs, one of the projects I'm leading is the new Agriculture Trade Education Council, and I'm serving as Executive Director of that nonprofit.
Is this a standalone nonprofit or is it under the umbrella of another company then?
No, it's a standalone nonprofit. So it's incorporated as a 501c3 nonprofit. It has an independent board of directors that includes representatives from the North American Meat Institute, the Fresh Produce Association of the Americas, International Dairy Foods Association, Corn Refiners Association, U.S. Grains Council, and then we have the director of Washington State Department of Agriculture, Derek Sanderson, who's obviously a member of NASDA.
How do people find you and learn more about what you do as an organization?
So we just launched this nonprofit this year, so we're brand new, and we just did the public launch just a couple weeks ago, so very new. And the mission of the Agriculture Trade Education Council is, as the name implies, to help educate people about international trade and how it works, and how people can get involved in trade. 20% of U.S. farm revenue comes from exports. So $1 out of 5, it's a big number. Without exports, the farm economy in the U.S. looks much different and much worse. So we want to help people figure out how they can engage in trade. We want people to understand what U.S. trade law says about remedies if other countries are not playing fair. We want people to understand what the World Trade Organization is, what a free trade agreement is, so that farmers, ranchers, food companies can make better decisions and hopefully increase their exports.
In order for a farmer or rancher or ag organization to work with you, do they have to meet a certain criteria? Do they have to answer questions? How does the process get started?
Great question. So what we're starting with is we're going to be hosting sort of Trade 101 workshops, and we're going to be doing those in partnership with ag commodity organizations or ag businesses. So, for example, if pick your organization wanted to host a meeting, has an annual meeting coming, or is hosting an ag convention, they could bring us in to do a workshop, and that could be open to their membership or their board or their senior leadership. So that would be a very easy way for a person in 2 hours or 4 hours to get information about agriculture trade. In time, we hope to build out online modules so people can take classes at their own tempo and their own pacing, and also have the website serve as a clearinghouse of information on trade issues. But for now, we're really starting with these workshops this spring at ag conventions.
The show will continue, but first a word from our sponsor, DPH Biologicals. Be sure to find out more about their new biofertility platform, TerraTrove. Refined across millions of acres, TerraTrove works in broad acre applications to improve soil structure while maintaining plant nutrition. TerraTrove combines microbes, plant extracts, and algae to offer the most complete biofertility solution available. To unharness soil fertility and maximize yield, visit dphbio.com to learn more. Brian, do you anticipate most of your clients being like single farm ranch entities or more like state departments of agriculture or other larger ag entities? Single farmer rancher entities, or are we talking more about like departments of agriculture or larger organizations?
Well, I think all of the above. I mean, I think a lot of farmers, it kind of depends on your crop, but a lot of the commodity crops, people don't think of themselves as exporters necessarily, right? They raise grain, they sell it to a grain elevator, and they say, well, that's as far as I see the product. And of course, the grain, a good chunk of it, then goes on a barge or goes overseas, goes on a freighter. So helping people understand what trade is and how it benefits them, or in some cases, how it can be a challenge to them. I mean, it's both sides of the equation. It could individual farmers, I think, can definitely benefit from this, just understanding how markets work, and that can help them make better decisions about, if they see a trade agreement is being negotiated, they might have a better sense of how likely it is to become law and actually be implemented, and what commodities would be included. So I think it's for everyone who's in food and ag, really.
Does the Agriculture Trade Education Council work with USDA or other national organizations as a voice or even doing some lobbying to help not only with current trade agreements, but putting together future trade agreements, helping to write the rules or anything along those lines?
So the Agriculture Trade Education Council is set up as a non-advocacy nonprofit. So it will not be lobbying. It will not be advocating one way or another on trade deals. Our goal is just to provide information. We want to make sure that farmers and ranchers and food companies in the U.S. have easy access to the information.
The show continues right after this quick word from our sponsor. Looking for an alternative to start fertilizer? DPH Biologics offers a competitive alternative for broad acre crops without sacrificing yield. Refined across millions of acres, TerraTrove combines microbes, plant extracts, and algae to offer the most complete biofertility solution available. To harness soil's fertility to maximize yields, visit dphbio.com to learn more. Brian, what are some common myths or questions that you get from people regarding agriculture trade?
Well, I think there's a number, and that's one of the reasons why we launched the Ag Trade Education Council to help people. Number one, I think one misconception would be, well, what is the World Trade Organization? It sounds a little scary. Like, is this some international government thing that is bad for us? And it's important for people to understand, well, the World Trade Organization is something that the United States helped create and launch post World War II. And the reason we did it is because we wanted to regulate trade. We wanted to make sure that if we were shipping food to, say, China, we had a remedy if China started rejecting our contracts, or if China started saying we're not going to accept your food because, for whatever reason they would make up. So the World Trade Organization is really that kind of international referee that allows us to make sure that we can actually trade food without a rules-based system and a referee and a dispute resolution mechanism. It's hard to have effective trade. And again, that's trade is so important for US farmers. So I think one piece that we're going to be focusing on is just helping people understand what is the World Trade Organization and why does it benefit farmers. But I don't think it stops there. I think, a lot of farmers would say, I'm pro exports, but I'm skeptical of trade. Everyone likes to think about us selling food overseas, but do we like food coming in, or do we like products coming in? And I think helping people understand what balance of trade means, and that farmers in the U.S. get, fertilizer comes in from overseas, chemicals that are used in our pesticides and our herbicides come in from overseas, tractor parts come in from overseas, steel that's used in everything from, cattle guards to fencing comes in, and grain bins. So international trade affects farmers both in terms of our ability to sell products and also the input costs that we have for running our operations.
What are some other goals you have for the organization?
Well, a couple things. Our long-term vision is we want to build out Trade 101, 201, 301, sort of stepped up in complexity workshops, so that people can really become expert at trade. The Trade 101 workshop that we're working on right now is really kind of a survey of trade, and helps people understand current issues and how trade agreements are negotiated. In time, as I mentioned, we'd like to have online modules so people can take classes at their own time, that they can go to the website. Our website, incidentally, is agtradeeducation.org. So we'd like to set up that website so people could go there and download a class, take it, after harvest is done, take a couple hours and learn how trade works and be more effective in your profession. We also want to, in time, launch trade negotiation sort of role playing workshops where people can go in and do a practice trade negotiation and understand, what is the U.S. trade representative, what's their job versus U.S. Department of Agriculture versus U.S. Department of Commerce, and what are the international bodies that are related to trade? How do these negotiations work? And critically, how can everyday farmers get involved in negotiations and give their input to our government about what we want to see from a negotiation.
Brian, what else would you like to mention about the organization or talk to us about that I haven't asked about?
Well, I mean, I'd say a couple things. One is, I mentioned 20% of farm revenue is from exports. It's important for people to understand, the top three countries where the U.S. exports food and ag products right now are Canada, Mexico, and China. Each of those, we export about $20 billion per year in products. So those are the three that really are at the top of the list in terms of when you think about the volume of trade. They're not the only countries. They're not necessarily the only ones that we should be working with because we want to always expand markets. But you think about Canada and Mexico. Well, we have the U.S. Canada Mexico agreement, which is kind of the new NAFTA. So that's one thing we'll be helping people understand is how does U.S. Mexico Canada agreement operate and what does that mean for U.S. and Mexico trade? And then China, President Trump had a trade dispute with China. They entered into a phase one agreement. The Biden administration is now thinking about renewing that agreement. So we'll be helping people sort through, well, what does that mean? What is China committed to? What is the long-term goal for trade relations with China? Those are really the big three that are important for current exports.
Based out of Sheridan, Wyoming, I want to thank my guest, Brian Keel, Executive Director of the Agriculture Trade Education Council, for joining me on today's podcast. For more information, be sure to log on to agtradeeducation.org.
That wraps up today's interview. Thanks for tuning in to this edition of the Ag Queen Podcast.